So I wanted to do a video on the Venus terraformers, specifically the ones that tap to terraform each turn, and not the event terraformers that just get you a bunch of steps at once, and basically see which one of them are good, if they're worth it, and just compare one against the other. Just to see basically if any of them are worth playing really. And yeah, there's four. Three use floaters, one uses microbes. And yeah, let's quickly explain what's on the spreadsheet because it's the same for all of them. So the first column would be the costs, and so that's going to be the cost to play the card, to buy the card, and any additional costs that it takes to get the card effects. So in the case of Force Precipitation, that's 2. In the case of Jetstream, Microscrappers, Titanium, right? And so I'm just tracking that per generation. Then I'm tracking the floaters that you have at the end of each generation, and that's mostly to help me with the math on the spreadsheet, but it's there if you want to see it. And then the terraforming rating, unlike the other 3 columns, the terraforming rating I'm tracking at the beginning of the generation, just because it's a little easier to do the Excel math that way. It's how I've been doing it on all the previous videos. But yeah, and this is the terraforming rating. It's also your income, and it's also the number of steps you've moved on Venus, because they all just terraform Venus, right? And finally, the total MC, that is at the end of the generation, the total cash that you have when you add up the income that you get from increasing your terraforming rating, minus the costs that it takes to buy the card, play the card, and run the card. So let's go into each one. The first one is the first one that works with floaters is Extractor Balloons. Now, Extractor Balloons is the most expensive one by far. It costs 9 more than the second one. There's 2 reasons for that. The first one is it doesn't cost anything to add the floater. And the second one is that it already comes with 3 floaters, so you can terraform Venus on the first generation. So let's just run it. So you pay for it 24. After that you'll pay 0. Next, the floaters. So Extractor Balloons comes with 3 floaters, as I said, and at the end of the first generation you'll just remove 2 to terraform immediately. So at the end of that generation you'll have 1 left there. And what's gonna happen is, after that it just goes up, and if you're at 2 it goes down to 0, and it just basically repeats that for the rest of the game. The terraforming rating, so it starts at 0, and then let's just look quickly at how it goes. You remove 2 floaters, so it'll move to 1 in the first generation, and then you add 1, and then you remove 2, and at that point it moves to 2, and then it goes into a 3 generation cycle. So even in the 12th generation you'd still be at 4. But yeah, you basically get a little faster on the first 2 generations. And finally, the total MC, yeah, it'll just start like this, and then it'll, in the case of Extractor Balloons, it'll go up the whole time because you're just increasing your income. And you'll see that in 11 generations, and I did decide to go to 11 because with Venus, games can be a little longer if one player is dedicated to it, which with Extractor Balloons you probably are. But this doesn't become cash positive until the 11th generation. And so you finish with probably 4 victory points. Even at the end of the 9th you would get that 4th one. Remember, this is 3 at the beginning, so even if the game goes 9 generations, you'd probably get that 4th victory point. So it's pretty sure that if you play it in the first generation you'll finish with 4, slightly cash positive, and a total of 4 Venus steps. That's 8%. So yeah, well, that's what Extractor Balloons does. Let's look at it in more detail once we do the other ones. So Force Precipitation. So this costs 8 to play. Well, let's look at what it does first. It's very similar. The main difference to Extractor Balloons is that it's a lot cheaper, 13 cheaper, but it costs 2 to add the floater, and it doesn't come with any floaters on it. So yeah, in that sense, it'll get up there in cost eventually, but it's much cheaper at the start. So Okay, so let's look at what happens. This one is going to start with one floater at the end of the first generation, and then it'll just cycle, you know, to 2, to 0, to 1, to 2, to 0. And the initial cost of that is going to be, you know, 8 plus 3, that's 11, just to buy and play the card. And on the first generation, you're going to spend 2 extra, so that's a minus 13. And then, as you can see, it'll alternate. Yeah, basically whenever you're going from 2 floaters to 0 floaters, you're not paying because you're doing this ability, but otherwise you are paying 2 every generation. And if you do that math, that's going to be around 10 if you go up to 11. I mean, you obviously wouldn't pay for this one. So I'm actually just going to 0 that, actually, because it's the last one in any case. Your terraforming rating starts at 0, and then it's just going to be on a 3-generation cycle for the whole game. You'll most certainly end up at 3. Even if the game ends on 9 generations again, this jumps to 3. So yeah, as you can see, forced precipitation ends up being more expensive. So you get a total of 12 extra that you pay, which is the same as Extractor Balloons. Basically, it's 1 less, but also Extractor Balloons comes with 3 free floaters, which allows it to get an extra terraforming step and get a little faster on the income. So forced precipitation has the advantage of giving you like it lets you play basically an extra card in the first 2 or 3 generations, but by Gen 4 and 5 it's basically the same. It's actually tied on Gen 6, and if you go, you know, 11 generations, it's just like the more you go, the better Extractor Balloons look. So this is not to say that it's worse, because I always say cash at the beginning of the game is worth more than at the end. But yeah, it's basically, I would only pick this one over this one if I have more stuff to play in my hand and I'm a little short on cash. If I'm a little richer and maybe don't have a lot of other Venus cards to play, then I would go for Extractor Balloons based on this. Because I would say really it's the first 3 generations. You see, you're up to 7 in difference. On the 4th, it's 4th in difference. The difference in cash is just 4, and on the 5th one is 1. So it does allow, like, basically acquired company. You can play acquired company here, 1 generation earlier, with forced precipitation. So in that sense, it's a little better, but long-term, Extractor Balloons, more victory points, better overall returns. And yeah, faster to most Venus steps, which is something that's important because you want to play some Venus cards. That's the main reason to play these things. I'll get into that later. So next up is Jetstream Microscrappers, and just let's look at this one. It costs 12, so it's a little more expensive than Forced, a little cheaper than Extractor Balloons, but this one is the only one that actually adds 2 floaters. So it actually, instead of terraforming every 3 generations, it terraforms every other generation. The hard thing, and I'm not going to take that a lot into account in this math analysis, is that you do need titanium. I'm just counting it as 3 cash, because that's what it's worth, and basically you don't pick this if you don't have the titanium production. So I'm just assuming that you also get titanium production, or have a preload or a corp that does so. That does make this card a little worse than the pure math that you're gonna see here, but I mean, in terms of math, it is just paying 3 per every other generation. So okay, this one's gonna start with 2 floaters. At the end of the first generation, it's gonna have 2 floaters, and then remove them, put them back, remove them, put them back. So pretty simple. The initial cost is gonna be 15 plus the titanium, that's 18, so minus 18. And terraforming rating starts at 0, and so there you have it. So it, much like forced precipitation, even though it starts a little better and not by much, it ends much worse than Extractor Balloons. So you'll end up with minus 8 cash, and that's obviously counted. And I'm gonna do the same thing here. You wouldn't pay for this one, so let's be fair. It's minus 5 cash. That's not so bad. You do get 5. If you get to 11 generation, you do get probably 1 extra terraforming rating than with Extractor Balloons, and 2 then Force Precipitation. But sorry, that's the end of the 10th generation when you get that. So 10 generations is not uncommon, but unlike these two where it's the end of the 9th where you get that extra step, this one does need the 10th generation, and that's not always a guarantee. If it's a 2-player and you're going heavy on Venus, you probably get there. But this one is ahead on victory points on Venus steps for most of the game. I mean, definitely faster than Forced. But Extractor Balloons does have an extra step on it early. They catch up here on the 5th generation. They catch up, they stay equal on the 6th, 7th, and then it only jumps ahead at the end of the 8th generation, right? Now, your game is probably gonna go that long, but it's not just the amount of victory points that you get, it's also the time within which you get them, because you want to play Venus cards with restrictions. And yeah, we'll get into that. But other than that, yeah, I mean, a little more expensive, an extra victory point. It's a little faster, but it's almost irrelevant. And yeah, unlike Force Precipitation, it doesn't give you enough, cash advantage early. You see, by the 3rd generation, this one's 22 and this one's 20. So yeah, at that point, it's kind of the same. Yeah, and then by the it's already worst by the 5th generation. It's slightly better still on the 4th, but it's worst on the 5th. So yeah, I don't think. I mean, I think this one is the hardest one to play, with some exceptions. But you do need an extra titanium production. Well, not an extra, but at least 1 titanium production to open your hand with to keep it. And even though it's the fastest, it'll get you more steps and more points. It looks like the better one, but I mean, on this base case, I think I like it the least, because I'd rather have Extractor Balloons if I have enough money. I'd rather have Forced if I'm very short, because I can play some other cards, and I might not even have that titanium production. Now, of course, your hands are always going to be like you pick all 3 of them and you choose the better one. This is just so you have an idea of how good each one, because you're probably only going to see one of these early, if at all. And it's to have an idea of whether it's worth it. But yeah, before we fully get into that, let's look at the last one. So the last one is Thermophiles, and Thermophiles follows the same floater pattern that Force Precipitation. Starts with 0 and then just cycles for 3 generations. Your TR starts at 0, and then again it cycles every 3 generations. The initial cost is minus 12, and then it goes 0 for the rest of the game. So this is pretty simple, and it's the same as like the 2 base game DHE producing bacteria, and the other one, the ones that do the oxygen and the temperature. Now the one caveat here, because this does look like it's the cheapest one, but it does require 6% Venus. You are not gonna get that in the 1st generation, so I think at best you get it in the 3rd. So I would ignore the last 3 rows basically and just assume that I get minus 5 with this one. And the other thing is that you actually already need another terraformer to get there, unless someone else is terraforming or you throw some asteroids, which I wouldn't recommend early. The Venus asteroids aren't good. So that's the deal with Thermophiles. Like, it's not bad, but the fact that it requires Venus to be at 6, it makes it a lot harder to play, in that whenever you can play it, you already have something else doing that and you might not need it. Because like playing these, you see, three generations in, you'll only get 2 steps, so it's not worth it, right? unless the game, and that's for an 11 generation game, right? So yeah, I would say this is actually the worst one. So let's get to the question: are these cards worth it? And to me, the answer is, well, first, economically, no. They all end up negative except Extractor Balloons. If you go to 11 generations, you actually gain 1 cash, which is terrible. Don't look at this as, you know, your 1 cash positive. It's a cash positive card. It's just a card that gives you cash negative for most of the game, which is when you need your cash the most, right? So never play this thinking that you're gonna get, you know, economy out of it. They're terrible economic cards. Victory points. If you compare cost to victory points, they're all fine. I mean, obviously, this one it's free. You're getting 4 victory points for free. This one you're getting 3 for 10. This one you're getting 5 for 5, which is great. The caveat here is that you are paying for the victory points in the first generation. And at that point, I would say you really want to focus on your economy, and not on victory points. So paying, you know, this amount of cash for victory points in the last generation is very different than paying for it in the first generation. They're still not bad in terms of victory points, even when you consider that, but they're not great. The other thing is that, remember, they're controlling Venus when they're terraforming, and Venus isn't controlling the tempo of the game. Again, I think my favorite one of these is Extractor Balloons. And it's still very heavy investment just for the, like, I wouldn't do this early just for the victory points, but it is probably the one that by itself I would say it's more worth it. But the real reason these cards are worth it is because there are a lot of good cards in Venus that have Venus requirements. And so, just to mention a few of them, so you have like Ishtar Mining, a good economic card at 8%. You have Sulfur Eating Bacteria, an even better economic card, I would say, at 6%. That's 3 steps. And then you have Neutralizer Factory, which is probably the cheapest way to terraform Venus. It's 10 for the step. That's at 10%. But then the real reason to play, I think it's the 4 points cards. Venusian Insects, probably the weakest one of these. Like, I wouldn't go for Venus just because I have that in my hand, but if I have other Venus cards in my hand, that's definitely one I would keep if I know that I'm getting to 12% fast. The 3 that I would almost certainly make me go for a Venus strategy are Stratospheric Verts at 12%, Maxwell Base also at 12%, and Venusian Animals at 18%. So that's 6 and 9 steps respectively, and I mean, think about it. Just Stratospheric Verts, if you get to 12% mid-game, that's 5 points. Maxwell Base can be even more, especially if you pair it with Stratospheric Verts. But it comes with 3 just by itself. And then the resource, I mean, you might waste it a couple of times on something cheaper, but once you get an animal there, then it'll get you 2 extra points. It gets you 5 points easy, which is great. And Venusian Animals, if you have the science tags, can go nuts in the last 2 generations. 18% is usually pretty high. I don't see them get that fast. But yeah, at 18%, I mean, that's really the reason to terraform Venus. You don't care about terraforming Venus beyond 18%, sorry. You only care until there, and it's to play Venusian Animals. I really love that card. Of course, if you get past ends and you have these cards, it's basically very cheap victory points, so you keep using them. But then I think that's where, again, Extractor Balloons may have the edge. It's the fastest 1 to 2. It gets to 2 in the 4th generation, at the end of the 3rd generation. So if you pair that with, if you're playing other cards that are also terraforming Venus, you just need one to play something like sulfur eating bacteria, which is going to be a very good economy card. You just need two to play Ishtar Mining, which is going to be a titanium, the cheapest titanium you can have. And again, this is to me the main reason to play these cards is that you have good Venus cards with requirements. I never play them for the economy. They're not as terrible as they are for economy for the points, but I'm not gonna play these for points early unless I'm going for Venus. So basically, I think this is the best for the base scenario. This is how I would rank them. I think Extractor Balloons is the best one. I think Jetstream, Microscrappers, and Forced Precipitations are close. I would take Forced in most cases because I think it lets you play other cards. In that case, other cards at Terraform Venus probably to get your steps faster. But if you actually have the Titanium, Jetstream Microscrappers is probably a little better. And assuming you don't have another good card to play early too. But the difference is closer there. It's only 5 between the two of them. And then the last one would be Thermophiles. I just find that once I get to 6%, I don't want a slow terraformer that gets me a terraforming rate, a Venus step every 3 generations and 0 to begin with. So I don't know if I've actually ever played this card. I don't think so. Now there are things that it combos with, like extreme cold fungus, but I think that's a niche scenario, and I didn't want to do combinations of cards for this analysis. I did want to mix them up with Viron and Celestic because these are corporations. It's not unlikely that you have it is unlikely that you see both Thermophiles and Extreme Cold Fungus and enough Venus cards that you go for a Venus strategy. That is very unlikely. But it's not unlikely that you have one of these cards in your hand and that you have Celestic or Viron, especially Celestic, which actually draws you cards with floors, so it might draw you these. So I did want to look into those scenarios. So let's do just that. Okay, so I'm not going to do each one with both corporations. I'm just going to do each one with the best corporation for them. So in the case of Extractor Balloons, it doesn't really matter. They both basically do the same thing. In the case of Forced Precipitation, Celestic is better because Viron, if you have to add a microbe twice on the same turn, it costs an extra 2 with Viron. Most of the time you're going to be adding 1 and then removing 2, but every third generation you're going to be adding, and that's an extra 2 with Viron, so it's a little better with Celestic because it adds the floor for free. Jetstream Microscrappers is obviously better with Viron because with Celestic you can add 1, but you cannot add 2 every generation, which with Viron you can add 2 and then remove 2. With Celestic you can add 1 and then remove 2, or add 2 and then add 1. And Thermophiles only works with Viron, so I'm gonna do, again, Extractor Balloons, it doesn't matter. Forced Precipitation I'm gonna simulate with Celestic, and the last 2 I'm gonna do with Viron. So the costs are the same. It's gonna be you're gonna start with first generation, so you're gonna start with 3 floaters, and then you're gonna remove 2, and then you're gonna add 1 because you have that extra action. So you're gonna start with 2 floaters in the first generation, and then for the second one you're gonna remove the 2 that you have and then add 1. For the third one you're gonna add 1 and then remove 2. It'll be at 0, and then it just basically repeats that cycle. Costs to begin with are the same, minus 24, and so the total costs are that. And the initial terraforming rating, you start with 0, but then you get 1 immediately on the first generation, and most generations you get a bump. Like every other third generation you actually don't, but that's it. And so as you can see already, this is so much better. By 11 generations you get 19 plus, and you're getting 7 victory points. So that's with Celestic or Viron. Before we get into analysis, let's just do them all. I think it's faster. So force precipitation. So you're going to start with 2 floaters at the end of the first generation, because you're going to tap and tap, right? To put the floater. Initial terraform rating is 0, and you're going to pay the same 13, because I'm assuming Celestic, not Viron. You don't have to pay that twice. And so basically the way it goes is that you're going to be using Celestic to add the floaters most of the time. You're going to be using the ability on the card to remove, but every 3rd generation you're going to end with 0, so you're going to add 2 microbes. So for example, floaters. After you empty on the 3rd generation, you're going to pay 2 to add, and you're going to add another one with Celestic. And yeah, every 3 generations that's going to happen. Again, this one finishes much better. Jetstream Microscrappers. So you're basically going to add 2 and remove 2 every generation, right? So your floors are going to be 0 every generation. Terraforming rating starts at 0. And your costs are going to be 18 initially, and then 3 for the rest of the game, because you're going to pay that titanium for the rest of the game. So this one actually gets a lot more expensive, because you're actually playing a lot more, but it's also the one that's going to get you the craziest amount of victory points. Finally, Thermophiles. This one only works with Viron, so you're going to start with 2 microbes. TR starts at 0, and your costs are -12, and it's just going to follow the same pattern as force precipitation for the microbes. So let's look at them now. And I mean, this is assuming you get them on your starting hand. Again, with Thermophiles, you're probably getting this far, which means this is the only one that's still really bad economically. But you're now getting a bunch of victory points, and you're getting your Venus steps really fast. So, for example, by itself, this one gets you to 12%, which is one of the ones you want at the end of the 6th generation. So remember, this is at the beginning of the generation, the TR. So by the end of the 6th generation, or not by the end, by the time you play this in the 6th generation, you're already at 12%, which means you got two of the 3 good point cards, Stratophytic Verts and Maxwell Base, really early, just by playing this early. Same thing with Extractor Balloons. It gets there actually 2 generations later, in the 8th generation, but that's pretty good, because you're probably going to pay for a couple of Venus steps the hard way, like with asteroids and stuff. So I mean, realistically, they get you there early, 3rd or 4th generation maybe even, and they'll get you these points, because even after you get the cards down, you get to 80%, you're going to keep tapping, and you know, it's just cheap points for all of them. So in this, what is the best one here? I think it's without a doubt Jetstream Microscrappers with Viron. I mean, it's gonna get you probably 3 more points than the other ones. It'll get you a terraform each step. It's the worst one economically, but you don't care about these cards economically. Even if these 2 are actually good, see that they don't become positive steel until the 9th generation. So that's not a card you would play economically, right? Even they become very cash positive in the 10th and 11th generation, but that's just because they're that's when the bulk of the money generation comes, right? It's decent on the 9th, 5 and 4. It's still cash negative on the 8th generation. So you don't play these cards for economy still. They get a big payout at the end if you go long, but you don't play them for economy. You play them for the victory points and for the Venus steps that they get you that let you play other cards. And so in that sense, by far the best one is Jetstream Microscrappers when you can combo it with Viron. I think the second best one is probably Extractor Balloons still. It just gets you those steps a lot faster. And it is a little better economically at the end, but that's it. Force Precipitation would be my least favorite in this scenario. Sorry, I mean, it's always Thermophiles actually. And again, if you're already at 6%, you don't want to slow terraforming, and it is still slow. It is like, see that you play it and you don't actually get income until 3 generations after you play it, because the first one doesn't add any, and then on the second one you add it, which means you get the income by the third one. You'll get the step on the second one, but yeah, I really don't like Thermophiles. I don't think there are many scenarios where I would play these. There's probably none. These other three, I think they're all completely playable if you have Venus or Viron or Celestic. Again, this one is slightly better with Celestic. This one is much better with Viron than with Celestic. So if you did this one with Celestic, I actually would probably still be the worst of the three. But with Viron, where you can get to do it every generation a step, that's just too fast. So Viron plus these plus Stratospheric or Maxwell base is an amazing hand. Because eventually you'll switch into the points for Stratospheric birds, right? It's better. It's more points per generation, or the ones for Maxwell base. And that's the other advantage Viron gives you, is that it just taps twice. It doesn't just add floaters. It's much better than Celestic. So yeah, I mean, that's it. So just to reiterate my conclusions, none of these cards are worth it on their own. They're negative economically for the most part. They're a huge investment into victory points early, which you never want to do. And the only reason you would play for them on the base case, and let's just go back to that sheet, is to go a little faster on the Venus steps that you need to play other cards. If you get them with Celestic or Viron, I think that's all three of these are very playable. They'll get you more points, they'll get you your steps much faster, and I mean that's basically when they work to me, with Viron and Celestic. Otherwise, you play them just because maybe you have two good Venus cards in hands that you want, maybe an economy card and then one of the point cards, and then I would play them without Viron and Celestic, but otherwise I wouldn't. But yeah, anyway, I hope you liked the video. Let me know what you think. And yeah, I still have one more video coming up on Venus that I wrote. It's gonna be on Viron, which is I've been talking a lot about Viron lately, but it is my favorite corporation. So yeah, see you next time.